Hello, I'm Dickie Arbiter in London.
And I'm Victoria Arbiter in New York, and you're watching Royal Report. In the wake of Queen Margrethe of Denmark's decision to abdicate early last month, talk swiftly turned to King Charles and whether or not he would ever follow suit. Since news of his cancer diagnosis was revealed on February 5th, such talk only escalated. Now, the British monarchy is famed for its ability to prepare for every eventuality, but still so much of the coverage has been disrespectful, not to mention alarmist. Given some publications have already written him off, we thought it time to rein in a little of the catastrophizing with a few hardcore facts. Now, Dad, I think it would be enormously helpful if we could begin with you explaining exactly what the role of a Councillor of State is and why the Regency Act of 1937 exists.
Well, a Councillor of State is basically an understudy to the Sovereign. The Councillor of State, he or she can take Privy Council meetings. They can sign papers, certain papers, not all papers, not acts of law. They can welcome foreign ambassadors who are accredited to the Court of St James. They cannot prorogue Parliament. And they cannot appoint peers. So their duties are very limited. Now, with Councillors of State, if there is a Privy Council meeting, the King can do it. He can do it virtually. Late Queen did it virtually from Windsor very often. But if he chooses not to, then there are 7 Councillors of State. There's the Queen, Prince William, Prince Edward, Prince Andrew, Prince Harry, Princess Royal and Princess Beatrice. Now, before you throw your hands up, Buckingham and say, but they're not all Councillors of State. No, they're not. Buckingham Palace very carefully before Christmas, they put in an addendum to the Councillors of State and saying only working royals. So that takes out Andrew, Harry and Beatrice and leaves the Queen, William, Edward and Anne. And that is all we need. And one or two will always be in the country to be able to take say a Privy Council meeting, which is fairly important. It's when the government have something to say and they get the Privy Councillors, not all of them because there are so many of them, but a clutch of Privy Councillors in front of a roar to discuss whatever they've got to discuss. A Regency, and you talk of the 1937 Regency Act, that was brought in following the 1910 Regency Act, and I'm going to wind back a little bit. 1910 Regency Act was brought in by George V. All his children were under the age of 18 and 21. The heir to the throne must be at least 18 in order to become a regent. The others must be over 21. And he decided, because his children were under 18, that Queen Mary, in the event of, would become regent. Moving on to 1937, the Regency Act then didn't specify if something happened to the king who would become regent, because you've got to remember when he came to the throne at the end of 1936, his eldest daughter, who was heir apparent, Princess Elizabeth, was only 10. So it was unwritten that his next brother, Henry, Duke of Gloucester, would become regent in the event that the king couldn't carry on the function. It just so happens that by the time he had these various operations at the end of 1940s and the early 1950s, Princess Elizabeth was over 21, so that didn't really come into play. So I've tried to explain it simply. It is quite complicated, but when a regent is taken on, when a regent does take on the powers of the sovereign, he or she can do everything the sovereign can do. What a Councillor of State cannot do, although there is a precedent for that. They cannot prorogue Parliament. But it did happen in 1974 when late Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, and Princess Margaret, who were Councillors of State, had to prorogue Parliament because the country was going through crisis. It was a 3-day week. The miners were on strike. The Prime Minister wanted to call a general election. You cannot call a general election until Parliament has been prorogued. And the Queen was actually away. She was in Oceania, in the South Pacific, and going to visit Australia and New Zealand. She couldn't get back in time, and therefore she gave permission for Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, to prorogue Parliament. Very unusual for that to happen, but under those circumstances, that's what did.
And both of these are really in quite extreme circumstances. So just going to Councillors of State, because heaven forbid it comes to that point, that would be sort of long before a regency would be enacted. But councillors of state are there, they may, I think may is a key word, they may act on behalf of the monarch in their absence or in the event of illness. And actually the late Queen Elizabeth II only had her councillors of state represent her when she was ill one time, and that was in May 2022 when Prince Charles and Prince William, as they both were then, represented her at the state opening of Parliament. So that is just one illustration of how unusual it is for a councillor of state to be called upon in the event that a monarch is ill. And certainly the king, he's not at any point, certainly in the foreseeable future, hopefully not at all. There's no reason why we should think that he is going to be mentally incapacitated. And that's really when we start looking at these alternatives, it's because the king or queen is completely incapable of carrying out their role, which is why a lot of this catastrophizing was sort of so extreme. I know there's this old adage in the media, if it bleeds, it leads, and they go straight to the most dramatic outcome. But I think we have to really rein this in and take the lead of Buckingham Palace, which at the moment certainly is saying that the king remains wholly positive.
The only time that we've had a regent, because the sovereign's been mentally incapacitated, was way back in 1811 when King George III had porphyria. It was a mental illness. His son, who was Prince of Wales, became regent, and he was regent right up until George III died in 1820, after which he then became George IV. That's the only time there has been a regent. So the sovereign has got to be mentally incapacitated for there to be a regent. Charles is not mentally incapacitated.
This current situation is obviously temporary. God willing, the king is going to make a full and speedy recovery. We know certainly that the Princess of Wales is going to be back on the royal beat as soon as she's fully recuperated. We're expecting that to be on or around or a short time after Easter. But the current situation, without being alarmist, it's just an observation, but it does speak to the perils associated with this sort of slimmed down monarchy. We know that the king had been a big proponent for a slimmed down monarchy, and it's been widely applauded because in part of the reduced costs associated. But even without him promoting this idea for a slimmed down monarchy, there's been a natural slimming down. We lost both the Queen and Prince Philip. Andrew was fired. Harry chose to remove himself. With Harry went Meghan. And the king's elderly cousins, who had supported her for so much of her reign, did tremendous work with very little fanfare. They're all in their 80s. So there's been a very natural slimming down without the king really trying to promote it. But I think now we find ourselves in this situation where very few figures are stretched very thin, because people forget, and we're going to get into the Danish situation in just a moment, because comparing the two is like comparing apples and oranges. But the British monarchy isn't just responsible for the United Kingdom. There are the Commonwealth realms. There is the Commonwealth of Nations, for which the king serves as head of state. There are responsibilities on behalf of the military, not just the British military. There are big set-piece occasions, national state occasions. And so at the moment, we're looking at William carrying a huge part of the burden as the youngest member of the senior working royals, Princess Anne, who of course is out there trucking, as you would expect, Edward, Sophie, and the Queen Consort. And I think it's interesting because it wasn't that long ago, it was just before the coronation, that Princess Anne did an interview with a Canadian network. And she was asked about this idea of a slimmed down monarchy. And she said, it doesn't look very good from where I'm standing. And now here we see she's picking up a lot of the slack. So yes, on the one hand, it's temporary. And we've had small monarchies before. It just so happened that the Queen had a lot of people to call upon. But how do you see the coming weeks sort of unfolding? We know that William has been given room to be with his children throughout their half-term break. He's going to be picking up some responsibilities on behalf of his father, but as far as we know, he has been given permission and his desire is to remain at home taking care of his wife. So how do all of these responsibilities get taken care of, especially while they're still reassigning a number of the Queen and Prince Philip's charities that were left without a patron?
Well, William has come back to work. He did two engagements, an investiture and a charity dinner as patron of the London Ambulance Service on Wednesday. And he is back at work. He's easing himself back in again. Buckingham Palace have said there's little likelihood that the rest of the family will be called upon to take on the King's engagements. They've been put on the back burner, and at some stage when he's back in harness, they'll be brought out again. So the royals that are left will carry on with their own arrangements. But what is coming up, which is quite interesting, on March the 11th, which is not that far away, is the Westminster Abbey Commonwealth Service. That is something that the late Queen always went to. The King, as Prince of Wales, went last year. It's not necessary for the sovereign to necessarily go to Westminster Abbey, head of the Commonwealth. Well, perhaps he or she feels that they have a duty. There's a big turnout of royals, and it is a very special day in terms of the Commonwealth. The Commonwealth High Commissioners, Commonwealth Ambassadors are at the service, youngsters representing the Commonwealth, and the flags of the Commonwealth are there. It is a real Commonwealth celebration for young people. So who will take that on? There is no specific role for the royal family to do anything at the service except be there. There's always been a good turnout, and my guess is there'll be a pretty good turnout this time. But what we've got on the 28th of March is Royal Maundy. Now, Royal Maundy represents the washing by Christ of the feet of the apostles at the Last Supper prior to his crucifixion on Good Friday. So Royal Maundy, 28th of March, which is a Thursday, is something that the sovereign always does. The King, as Prince of Wales, did do it for the late Queen in 2022. There wasn't one the previous year because of COVID, and he did one last year at York Cathedral. So the likelihood of him doing it this year is probably not. And who will do it? It's probably something that Prince William would do. It is something that it's traditional. It's traditional for the sovereign to do it. Dates back to 600 AD. Elizabeth I used to go out and give. Really, the money they give out represent the alms. Giving money, giving clothes, giving food to the poor. Now, what happens now in modern times is that the pensioners, the aged of a community, wherever Royal Maundy is held, are given two purses, one with modern coins and one with Maundy coins. Now, Maundy coins are very, very valuable in terms of what they represent. A lot of people will keep them rather than selling them on eBay. And the Maundy coins are, in the case of the King, would be 75 coins because he is 75, and 75 people, 75 men and 75 women would be receiving the coins. So it's something that cannot be shelved. It's something that will go ahead, but who does it remains to be seen.
Of course, we don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves because, God willing, the King is going to respond well to treatment and be back out on the beat as he would want to very, very soon. But this year has quite a number of significant events. June marks the 80th anniversary of D-Day. June is packed with Trooping the Colour, the Sovereign's official birthday, there's Royal Ascot, there's the Garter ceremony. So there's a lot coming up that he is going to want to be present for. So if that means missing some of the events earlier in the year to concentrate on his health, so be it. It will be an opportunity for, as you say, Prince William to step up. But where Prince William is perhaps not going to be stepping up is as king any time soon. This talk of abdication, I know, Dad, you get just as irritated as I do, because there's no reason why the king should abdicate. Yes, he's been diagnosed with cancer, but besides that, he's fit, he's well, he's mentally astute, he is energized, he's ready to do his role. But comparing his reign to that of Queen Margrethe of Denmark is like comparing apples and oranges. She chose to abdicate on the 52nd anniversary of her reign. She had extensive back surgery last year, which she says went well, but it takes its toll on someone of her age. She's 83, she'll be 84 in April. She also lost her husband just a few years ago. And as we know from the Queen, the late Queen, our late Queen, you get on with the job, but it's quite difficult when you've lost your person. That takes a toll in many respects as well. It hasn't helped, I think, in some respects that the Danish monarchy has been, oh gosh, I hesitate to say racked with scandal in recent years because that sounds so tabloidy, but there have been some issues. She famously stripped her second son's children of their royal titles. We're not going to get too much into that. He says it was a terrible shock and they didn't see it coming. The royal household said, yes, he knew about it way in advance. So, pick which side you choose to believe, but they claim it was not a surprise at all. But of course, it threw things into a bit of turmoil. But there's one particular statement that the king made, Dad, which I know you're going to refer to, which illustrates so beautifully why he is not going to abdicate. And it's in a very similar vein to his late mother.
It is a very similar vein to his late mother. He made very clear the night after his mother died, in a statement to television, that he will continue, and these are not the exact words, but he will continue for as long as God gives him time to, which really says exactly the same as his mother said in 1947 on her 21st birthday speech, that he will carry on until he draws last breath, and he will. Go on to abdication. European monarchs have a knack and have a habit of abdicating. I mean, if you look at Holland, for example, I remember old Queen Wilhelmina. She reigned for something like 50 odd years, and then she abdicated in favour of her daughter, Queen Juliana. Juliana stayed for about 32 years, and she then handed over to Beatrix, who stayed for 35 years, and then she handed over to her son, Willem Alexander. So, they have a knack of doing it. The Belgian king had to abdicate because he'd been a bit of a naughty boy and had a child out of wedlock. Naughty chap. And then you had Juan Carlos. He was another playboy who thought he could get away with it, and he abdicated. And now we've got a very stable monarchy in Spain with King Felipe. So, the European monarchs do have a knack of abdicating. Queen Margrethe, on the other hand, yes, she did have this back operation. I think that left her very weak, and she felt it time. She was using a stick. She looked a very sad figure after she'd signed the papers and then got up to leave the room, and I really felt sorry for her. But she probably made the decision based on health grounds. She saw the way our Queen had gone through after the death of Prince Philip, who I believe became frailer and frailer as a result of losing him, and she didn't want to go that way herself. So she handed over to her son. So it is something that happens on the continent. It's not going to happen here. We had a taste of that in 1936 with Edward, who couldn't do the job without the help and support of the woman he loved. Well, I don't think she loved him anyway. And they went off to Paris and got married in May the following year and never lived happily ever after. So we're not going to have any of that. Charles is going to carry on until he draws last breath, like his mother. It's not going to be as long as his mother, obviously, because he came to the throne in his 70s. But he's going to give a jolly good job at it. And we're going to be surprised at how he tackles the job. He's done brilliantly so far. I remember years ago when I was working for him, people used to say to me, well, do I think he'd make a good king? Well, he was a jolly good Prince of Wales, and he'd be a better king than he was a Prince of Wales. And he's done brilliantly so far. He will be brilliant once he gets back on the road again. Let him get over this. People do get over it. He's having treatment. He will get over it. Meanwhile, he will continue doing his constitutional role, as quite rightly he should do. And every other royal should get on and do what they're supposed to be doing.
People love to compare the British monarchy to the European monarchies, but it's almost an impossible comparison. You just have to look at the British monarchy for its global breadth and its impact on a global scale. I mean, the king, like we've talked about, is head of the Commonwealth of Nations, which encompasses over 2 billion citizens. It is a very different entity to the European monarchies. It's the same when the European monarchies all started slimming down. Everyone said, well, that's what the Brits need to do. Well, sure enough, we've got that slimmed down monarchy now, and it's proving to be quite tricky to cover all of their responsibilities. As you say, it will come back. It will, and they will muddle through because that's what they do. But just because something works for a European monarchy doesn't mean you can automatically transfer that over to another monarchy that is built on a very different foundation. I agree with you, Dad. I thought it was incredibly moving when Queen Margrethe signed the paperwork and got up and left the room. But what I was struck by, and I thought this was also incredibly moving, was that her son's step up to the throne came without the grief associated to the loss of the former monarch. And so seeing those celebrations across Denmark were quite remarkable. It felt you didn't have to feel guilty about celebrating because they weren't mourning a death at the same time. It was incredibly special. I don't typically follow much of the Danish royals, but I really got caught up in all the excitement of it, and it was moving. But how lovely now that the 52nd anniversary of Queen Margrethe's accession is now going to be marking the anniversary of the accession of her son. It puts a nice positive spin on it.
Puts a very positive spin on it. I know the Australians celebrated that one of theirs, Mary, has become queen. I had to remind them on one occasion that, yeah, Mary might be one of yours, but she's also one of ours too, because her parents were Scottish, which makes her part Brit.
It does indeed. We'll claim them however we can. Well, that's it from us this week. Please do use the comment section below. We would love to hear your thoughts. Clearly, we are 100% opposed to King Charles being forced to abdicate, but what do you think? Some people think he should step aside in order to make way for a youthful, vibrant, younger set, but age sometimes has its benefits too. So yes, please leave your comments below. Remember to click like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time for another edition of Royal Report.